Oh, she didn't say anything this time. Oh, well, never
Oh,
mind.
really? Is it recording? Oh, it is
It
recording.
is recording, yeah. Oh, okay. We'll cut this out. It's fine. Oh, we might not. I don't know. We'll see how I feel. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matt. I will be your alchemist this evening. And I am here with a very special guest. I am here with Patrice of the A's for Alien podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for thinking to invite me on.
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to you for a while, like for a good long while. So I thought I thought you would be kind of the perfect person to talk about some of the stuff that I kind of wanted to talk about. And yeah, it was nice to, yeah, I thought I'd reach out and here we are. So for people who don't know who you are though,
Hmm.
who are you? And what do you do?
Well, I'm the host of a very humble podcast called A's for Alien, which is I guess it's a paranormal theme podcast, but it's more kind of alien centric. So it's kind of more about the like 20th century UFO alien stories
Hmm.
because, oh, here I am.
And here you are.
Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, I try to put together interesting stories, interesting kind of takes on old stories that are a little bit different. And I guess I come from a bit of a skeptic background, a skeptic kind of history. So I try and present them balanced and kind of
Hmm.
try to see each one as a bit of a a thought experiment as opposed to just a retelling of a story and kind of looking into whether these stories could be real or not, like
Hmm.
if there is any kind of credibility behind them. And that does include like reading hundreds of pages of FOI documents and like going through like newspaper articles trying to find stories that are similar or corroborate that kind of evidence and try and put my own little bit of spin on it. So I've just
Hmm.
kicked off the second season, and I've changed the format a little bit to some of the earlier episodes just because I was thinking that I want to really. I was trying to take it to like a grassroots level so that if someone who's seeing all this stuff on the news about UAPs and tic tac UFOs and these new kind of like officers that are reporting to Congress,
Hmm.
like if you can understand that there's like a lot of history and lore associated with ufology and alien legends, then it kind of makes what's happening now have a little bit more kind of
Hmm.
importance, I guess. And it's really interesting, really, because I guess you could say at the very basic level, I'm almost like a folklorist because I'm
Hmm.
less about trying to uh, prove that anything's real or right, and more so about preserving the human experience because I feel like that's something which sometimes gets lost in these conversations
Hmm.
about like aliens and UFOs is that they
Hmm.
people think that they need to something needs to be proven 100%. And
Hmm.
in my episode, in my latest episode that I spoke about the reptilians, like there's not a lot of proof for reptilians. There's not a lot of scientific proof, and even the stories and things which they kind of talk about, like there's not a lot of proof
Hmm.
for that either. But one thing which you can't discount is if someone comes to you with a personal story, they're either lying or they're not. But if they truly
Hmm.
believe that and that truly happened to them, like all it takes is one person to be absolutely telling the dead set truth, and it means
Hmm.
that the phenomenon exists.
Right.
So
And you also have
yeah,
another podcast, which has, I think, just started, right? The Keeping It
yeah,
Supernatural.
yeah. So this one here is like a brand newie. And
Hmm.
basically, I started this off because I wanted a place that I could, like, I guess, wax lyrical a bit more just on any kind of topic. So,
Mm.
not really, and keeping, um, more structure to the Alien podcast and keep having it a bit more canonical so that
Mm.
people can, like, listen to the Alien podcast in order and it kind of tells a bit more of a story
Mm.
because I find like a lot of my audience will like binge them together. So they'll listen to like 3 or 4 hours in a row. And so
Mm.
I kind of I'm trying to keep that that thought process in mind when I'm creating content, so that if people are going to listen for 4 hours, you know, that it makes sense for 4 hours, not jumping and changing between, you know, stories about Bigfoot and then aliens, and, you know, so I want it to be a bit more better experience. So
well, the supernatural is even more kind of linked to the human experience in a lot of ways, because that's a lot more personal, it seems, to people.
Well, it is. And I think that it's like it's two sides of the same coin, I guess, because you know, it depends on how. I think that that's also one of the most fascinating things about this entire genre and community of people, is that you're allowed to have your own take on all of it, on any of it, you know. So you don't have to, like, some people believe that alien spacecrafts are true, like, nuts and bolts craft, and then there are some people that believe that they're spiritual entities, that they're interdimensional, or even that they're demonic, you know. So you can kind of go from one extreme to the other. And it's the same with the paranormal, is that there are some people that believe that they are a, you know, a sentient energy that is just outside of the purview of science right now. And then there are some people that believe that it is just, you know, a chemical imbalance in your brain that's making you think that you're seeing something. You know?
Yeah, well, so the episode you did, or the first one on the keeping it supernatural, was about was it dog men or dog people?
Yeah, that's some scary shit. That really freaks me out. And the thing about it too is I didn't go into it in too much detail. I went into a little bit of detail, but there is a lot of myths and legends about half dog men all around the world, like not just in like lycanthropy and things like that, is all through Eastern Europe, and it's also spoken about in like biblical times, through Mesoamerica, everywhere. So
I was going to say, these are not werewolves. These are, or are they werewolves? Or are they kind of two sides of a similar
Well, see, because
entity?
then, you know, the werewolf argument is that there is the werewolf lycanthropy argument, which comes from Germany, but then you've also got the fact that it might be a shapeshifter or someone that is like a like what's the American Indian term for it? The Native American Indian term is, I think they call them shapeshifters, but they also call them something else. And they are...
I can only say changelings because that's the Star Trek term.
Yeah, so it's very similar. I think it's probably a good thing I'm not saying it, because the legend with it is even speaking about them like brings them into your life, and they're essentially like
oh wow, I really hope it's not changelings.
Yeah,
then.
no, witch doctors. So they have this ability to change forms, and some of them change into wolves and coyotes and stuff like that. So there's that part of it, which is which can be part of it. But specifically the ones that I spoke about on the podcast last, they are a sub variant of like a Bigfoot creature. They get called dogman because they're considered almost the same sort of entity as a Bigfoot. So a lot of them say as well that they'll see Bigfoot creatures that have a more pinched nose, and and like more kind of pronounced canine teeth, like sharp teeth, and that's where they get the name, like the dogman name. Some of them will say that they almost look more like an Anubis kind of character, like a Doberman, and have like really pointed, like a Doberman with cropped ears, like really pointed ears.
Okay.
But that story that I told on the podcast was written in by a listener who was urban exploring, and that story still like freaks me right out. That wasn't just straight off Reddit. That was that they could hear a puppy whining, and it was all a misty night. I'll retell it for your listeners. So they were urban exploring at an old country club, and they were just finished up in the area that was the pool place of this country club. It had a golf course and everything like that, but had been abandoned for like 20-30 years. So they went to outside this pool area, and they could hear this whining like a little puppy. but they just said they like felt something was off, so they hid, and then they could see through the mist this giant form that was making the sound of the whining puppy, and they were both like frozen in terror because it was obviously like crouched down but still looked about 4 foot tall. And his friend like just grabbed him and like held him and was basically like, don't move. Like he said, it was almost like telepathy, like saying don't move an inch. And then apparently a hare kind of started running off in the distance, and they saw this thing like stand up on 2 legs, and it was like 7 foot tall, and it just like went after this hare. But it was almost
Okay.
like it was almost like it was kind of trying to like coax them out of
Mm,
their hiding space by lulling them into a false sense of security that it was just a
mm,
tiny little puppy.
I mean, it was distracted by a hare.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and so
Like
that's the
as
thing,
dogs
like,
are
how can you,
distracted by everything.
yeah, and that's it. You know, like I obviously know that these, like I have an email address that people can send through their like personal experiences to me, and sometimes I discuss them on the show. And
Mm,
the thing is too, is what I love about it, and you'd probably understand this too, like as a writer, that like certain kind of there's a certain kind of like interesting aspect to it when people say, oh, I have this story, or this story happened to a friend of mine, because it's either
mm,
entirely true, it's either entirely made up, or their mind has made them believe that that's what's happened to them. And I
mm,
think either any of those are interesting. Like if something is so well written that it chills me and freaks me out enough that I want to like freak other people out with it, like I still feel
mm-hmm,
like that's worth sharing, you know,
mm,
even if it's because, like I said, I'm not out to prove or disprove these stories, but it is about sharing other people's experiences with a
mm.
like-minded audience.
Well, that's the thing, really, with these kinds of stories and the alien stories as well. At their I
Mm,
mean, even viewing it from any kind of angle, whether you believe
mm-hmm.
it or not, I mean, whether you're skeptical or you're like, yes, this definitely happened, what
Yeah.
it boils down to is someone experienced something
Mm-hmm.
terrifying and they can't explain it.
Yeah.
And that's compelling in and of itself.
Yes. And I think um you know, obviously there are parts of it that is that, you know, I think that it's quite healthy to maintain a skeptical mindset, because, you know, I probably, my interest in this probably comes from experiences and trying to find the answers for them. And I feel like
Hmm.
a lot of people that are that are involved in this, and a lot of people who claim to be skeptics, probably have experiences themselves that they're searching for answers for, or a way
Mm.
to make some kind of logical explanation for what they've experienced, you
Mm.
know. So
Well, the danger with not having that mindset is that
mm,
you can fall for stuff really easily. Like you can be
yeah,
gullibility and you can be
yeah.
led up the garden
Well,
path.
Well, and you know, and it is a very the interesting thing about it is that because there you don't have to prove anything, you can very easily be led by people who are charismatic enough to influence you to
Mm.
believe something which may or may not be true. So for
Hmm.
example, like David Icke, like I'm obviously speaking very reptilian centric because I just finished an episode on that. But
Mm.
the thing is with him is that
He's a strange character.
yeah, and he packs out like stadiums for hours.
Yeah.
He hosts like 12-hour lectures
Mm.
speaking about this. And
The
you
thing
know,
with David Icke, he's a very strange guy, but he is very compelling. And like the thing
yeah,
is, even if you don't believe anything he's saying, what he's
yeah,
saying is kind of like, ooh, I mean, if that were
yeah.
true, that would be kind of interesting.
Well,
You know
and
what
I
I
think
mean?
that's it. Like he spins a good yarn, and he's also just he's because he has media training and stuff like that. He knows how to
Mm,
hold people's attention. He knows he's got a very animated face, like, you know, so when
mm,
you can't like tell him that he's lying. But it was really interesting learning about Arizona Wilder, the woman that he interviewed.
mm,
And there's a lot of people who believe that it was that particular interview, which was Revelations of a Mother Goddess,
mm,
that was what pushed him over the edge from just the standard kind of conspiracy stuff that he was talking about previously, like about how his reincarnation of Jesus and all of that,
mm,
to going into the full Illuminati
mm,
cycle, which is kind of interesting because all of that, all like interestingly, all of that kind of lore
Mm.
really ties into the topic that we speaking about
Hmm.
today, I think.
Indeed it does. Yeah, indeed it does.
Mm.
And that, you know what? You can tell that you do this a lot because that's a fantastic segue, Patrice. Let's get into it. All right. So
Yeah.
Leslie Shue mentioned this to me, I think, in when I did the interview with her, and
Oh yes,
we
I should
chatted
mention
about.
too. When you asked me on, I've gone through and I've watched all of your. Oh look, my dog's here. Sorry, just has
Oh,
to
that's for.
go
I
on.
am absolutely fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was very interesting conversations with everybody. I'm like feel very honored to be lucky number 7. Very interesting guests that you've had on.
Well, technically you're lucky number 8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Lucky number 8
one is going up.
in post.
Yeah, one is going up kind of today. But
Okay.
yeah, oh God, I've lost my train of thought completely.
You said that that she mentioned something
Yes.
about the yes.
Yeah, so when she was because she's only just kind of started kind of playing with D&D a little bit, Dungeons and
Okay.
Dragons. And
Yeah.
she mentioned that when she was growing up, I think she was growing up sort of in the 80s and toward the sort of early 90s.
Yeah.
She mentioned that there was this big satanic panic around things like Dungeons and Dragons. And I'd heard of it, but I had not had nary a detail about it really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, you know, who's probably going to know some stuff about this?
Yeah. the creepy girl. She's gonna know some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is a very, when you mentioned it, I knew about the satanic panic in the 80s because it has been something which has interested me a lot, especially from the perspective that I have done a lot of research into like the Pentecostal church and really conservative religious groups, like just through my work with I'm a skeptic and stuff like that. So like it was a really interesting rabbit hole to go down because it's not just as cut and dry as what you think. So I think that there's actually a lot of like good meat to this story that I'm really interested to like hear your perspective on, especially as somebody in the RPG community. And it will be, I'm really intrigued too to like read the comments from your listeners to see what their experiences have been with it, because looking at it from a perspective of like, I'm not sure if you've like listened to the demonology episode that I did when I interviewed I actually interviewed a satanic high priest. And so,
oh boy.
yeah, from New Orleans, he was really cool dude actually. But he had a really good chat because I said to him straight off the bat, I'm like, I have to be perfectly honest with you. Like I have done like limited research into grimoires and the lesser keys of Solomon and satanic ritual and all of that kind of stuff. I don't really like, I'm probably out of my depth having any kind of intellectual conversation with you about your faith, like just so you know, just no disrespect. But he was totally fine with it. But yeah, so the Dungeons and Dragons satanic panic is quite interesting, and I think you, as you're British, probably will be like, you know, you kind of have to put your Americanized cap on for this moment and just remember like the place that we're talking about, which is the fact that they are still very conservative and they do still have very strongly held religious beliefs.
With the religious element, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
this
was a period of time really where there was a lot of censorship and a lot of kind of moral policing in the sort of the 70s to the 80s.
Yes, and that actually has like a specific term called moral panic, which is different from a mass hysteria event, because mass hysteria is a psychological illness, which many people can have, whereas a moral panic is considered a sociological phenomenon. So that's what the differentiation between that is. But so the satanic panic in the Dungeons and Dragons world like started, though, arguably in 1979. And it was because of the disappearance of a young man called James Dallas Egbert III. Have you heard that name before?
I have not heard that name before.
So James Dallas Egbert III was just this sensationally talented individual. He graduated high school at 14 because he was basically just so incredibly smart, and he went to college basically from the age of 14. So
Okay.
he was part of a Dungeons and Dragons group to make friends, because obviously he's gone to college and everyone's older than him.
Right.
And so but he has, you know, had this interest in fantasy roleplay games, and so he's found people that have similarities and interest to him and all that kind of stuff. So he's quite young at this point. He was maybe about 15 or 16, so still, you know, very much younger than the people that he was associated with in college. And essentially what happened was that he disappeared. And so his parents hired a private investigator to find out kind of what happened to him. And essentially what had happened, he'd had like a schizophrenic psych attack and was in the steam tunnels underneath the college. So they found
Right.
him. And they basically said he'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons. The private investigator was like, this Dungeons and Dragons is like, you know, has something to do with it. He's had this psychotic break, and then he was in the steam tunnels under the like the building, blah blah blah. And then eventually,
Okay.
and then eventually what happened is 12 months later he did unfortunately die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound because he had
Okay.
these mental health issues. And obviously then that was kind of blamed on Dungeons and Dragons. So that's kind of the first incident of it, right?
That's a familiar story. Yeah.
Yeah. So then
Okay. So I'm guessing they not know that he had issues then? That he
well,
had,
see,
because
this is
if he had a schizophrenic episode, I mean, he must have had schizophrenia.
yeah, and that's the thing. So, but because he was so young, I don't know if it was just the pressure of like, I don't think he was specifically diagnosed. Sorry, my dog. If you can hear my dog breathing, because I know that my microphone it's not me breathing heavy, it's my dog because I'm talking, so he thinks I'm talking to him.
It's so humid in Australia.
Yeah, it is. That's my dog breathing off camera. Yeah, sorry to change the subject there. Yeah, no. So that is the thing. So he did have lots of mental health issues that were obviously not associated with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
You can look. I'm gonna have to shut the door because he's hang on.
That's okay. I'll cut this out.
So he sadly succumbed to the illness that he already had, but what you have to remember is that this is in the prime time for other satanic panics, and that was all due to a book which was published, which was called Michelle Remembers, which was written by a psychiatrist who did memory regression therapy on this woman called Michelle. And that's where we get the typical satanic ritual abuse memory
Okay.
thing, which was from this book.
Like
And so
the
basically
on the plinth in a pentagram, that kind of stuff.
and going on, I was like, it was because so she came out with this book saying that she had been like ritualistically tortured and all these horrific things had happened to her, and it was because of a satanic cult, like, you know, all of this kind of stuff. All of those methods that this particular psychiatrist used were eventually debunked. Strangely, he married her later, which breaks so many rules, you know, and he died. Well, no, like the psychiatrist married the girl who he regressed.
Oh, okay. I
But
misunderstood who married who.
yeah,
Okay.
so basically they wrote a book based on her regressions of these memories from when she was a child, and that she believes that she was ritualistically tortured in the name of Satan, right? So she wrote this book. It's called Michelle Remembers. Then what happened was that was when the McMartin preschool law event happened around 1982, which was when a teacher was accused of being part of a satanic cult that was ritualistically abusing kids at their childcare center. And this was like all through the 80s, this law case like happened. And basically it eventually got thrown out. But this particular psychiatrist who wrote the book Michelle Remembers essentially became like an expert in satanic ritual abuse. And so what that meant was that he would get called in. So it turned into this almost self-fulfilling prophecy, because he'd get called to speak at conferences. And at the conferences, he'd say, you don't know what you're looking for, so you have to look for these specific things. But then that was almost like implanting memories. And so then all of a sudden, everybody had these similar stories about ritualistic satanic abuse. And like Stranger Things is almost like touching on that now, because that in the latest episode, because it is like through the 80s, and they're kind of talking about all of this, because we have to remember too that the 70s introduced Anton LaVey, who kind of popularized the Satanism, because he was the head of that, hedonism, all of this kind of stuff, which was flew directly in the face of religious ideals and conservative religious beliefs. So that is when we saw too, like, rock music, Metallica, all of that kind of stuff also getting tarred with that same getting tarred with that same kind of brush.
And embracing it as well. Like they tarred with it, and then maybe embracing it because it was like a counterculture thing, and it was edgy. And and arguably, if it wasn't for Satanic Panic in Dungeons and Dragons, it may not have become what it did become, because their sales like surged after this. So basically, after that first incident with Dallas Edberg III, there was a second one with a man called Irving Lee Pulling, and he also died by committing suicide. And his mother had troubles accepting that he had issues, and basically like had psychological issues, and she attributed his death to Dungeons and Dragons and claimed that it was because he was introduced to the game through school, and a teacher placed a curse upon him, and then the curse was real. Oh, like in the game?
Yeah, so the curse that was put on him in the game transferred to real life. And the reason that her son did what he did was because of a curse that was placed upon him by his teacher at school, because the teacher taught them how to play Dungeons and Dragons. And so she launched this like major mass media attack on Dungeons and Dragons, to the point where it culminated in like her being on 60 Minutes with Gary Gygax, like arguing about like Dungeons and Dragons. So she created this group which was called BADD, like BADD, and it was bothered about Dungeons and Dragons. And so she basically made it her life's work to try and sink this game, right? So as a direct quote, she said that D&D is a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination, and other teachings.
I mean, most of those are present in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so she said, and so this is the part where we get into the religious parts of it. And as silly as it seems from the outside, you have to understand that like these people believe in a supernatural spirituality. Like Catholicism, Christianity is a supernatural religion, because they believe in powers, like they're God powers, right? But then everything else, if it's not God, is the devil, right? But to kind of understand the phenomena, like I'll come back to that, but to understand the phenomena that is created by what moral panic is, and how it created this situation that occurred in the 1980s around Dungeons and Dragons, is that moral panic is a situation in which the media creates a folk devil, is the term they call it, in which a certain group, demands that something's done about it. So in this particular case, Dungeons and Dragons was the folk devil. And it's defined as a mass movement against the false or exaggerated perceptions that exceed the actual threat that society is facing. So basically, they were trying to say that the people that are playing this game aren't astute enough to determine what's fantasy and what's not. And that it was even more dangerous for people who weren't Christians to be playing Dungeons and Dragons because they didn't have any idea of the danger that they were putting themselves in, And so that was the kind of the stance for that. So the idea of a moral panic was like kind of introduced in 1972 when a guy called Stanley Cohen produced a thesis on this. And he actually used the mods and rockers, which were basically just two youth groups. Like imagine like we're talking about Beatles-esque era. Like they dressed a little bit different, like the rockers dressed different from the mods, and but normally they just got along together. Like you said, they're counterculture kind of into music, into art, all this kind of stuff, normally get along really well independently of each other. In this one particular weekend, there was a series of acts of vandalism that happened, and the media kind of jumped on it and said like, oh, these youths are in these kind of gangs and they're disrupting the peace and all this kind of stuff. And so the media propagated this idea and distorted this the image of them by making these predictions that they were going to be rioting in the street and fighting each other and disturbing the peace. And then that almost became like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then what happened is that they were on the news and on the TV and talking to each other as if they were enemies, So then
it sounds like what this is sounding like to me is a mixture of sort of a mixture of like sort of it's like a perfect cauldron of stuff. So there's the folklore. What's the word? I guess the tenets and the beliefs around the religious side of it. There's the grifting. There's like some hard grifting going on here. From people who want to create a problem so they can benefit and profit off that problem. Like the consultant guy you mentioned, which hasn't gone away. And then there's the sort of not understanding. It's sort of like the not necessarily understanding like a tragedy as well. Like with these people, like with the kid that killed himself. And the other person, the kids, who just don't understand, didn't understand what was going on, maybe.
No. And see, that's the thing though, because then that is the argument where you could go, if someone really doesn't know the difference. And that was that was the argument that the conservative religious groups really latched hold of. But like you said, it's really important to keep, like you said, almost perfectly, those four, they call them 4 agents of moral panic, and that is the mass media needs to be involved. So it has to be on the news pretty much. And they, to sell newspapers and to make the story interesting, they exaggerate it. So they make it to be this like big deal. So they'll be like, kids everywhere are being possessed by the devil because they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, So they'll make this big, and they're killing themselves because when they die in the game, they kill themselves, like, and so that's kind of what they were trying to say. Then there's the next one. So mass media, then it's moral entrepreneurs, which is people who target that behavior. So that would be the concerned parents. So the concerned parents will be the ones that are then on the news going, my son had nothing wrong with him until he played Dungeons and Dragons, and then all of a sudden he had all these issues that he never had before. And it's because his teacher like struck a curse on him.
Well, that's sort of pride in a way. It's like you don't want to admit that something was wrong and you didn't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
And also you don't want to kind of tar the image of your kid. Like it's this, it's a perfect little vicious element
circle
that drives this stuff up.
And so then what happens is you've got all these parents going, Mike, nothing was wrong with my kids. This is a problem with the social fabric. And then you've got the news going, all these terrible things are happening and it's because of this game. So then eventually what happens is a politician will get involved or a church leader and go, I denounce Dungeons and Dragons. This is terrible. What's happening to these people? And then the fourth agent of this particular phenomena is if the public then have to decide which side they choose. And that's when it turns into this moral panic, because then you've got people going, Dungeons and Dragons isn't the devil. And then you've got other people going, yes, it is. It's 100% the devil, you know? So that's when things started to get a bit crazy, because from that point, that's when the church started to go, hang on a minute, we want to have like an official stance on this. And that leads us into the infamous comic sketch called Dark Dungeons.
Right.
Have you ever seen that?
No.
I'll bring it up for you. I can screen share it here, so you can see it. Okay, so this is
and we're back.
Yeah, we're back. So this is the comic strip by a man who he's this guy here, Chick Publications. Basically, he made money creating these like ridiculously outrageous, shocking, religiously motivated comic strips. A lot of them are like horrifically racist and homophobic, like terrible.
Okay, was it cast your spell?
Yeah, so this here is the Dungeons and Dragons Satanic Panic one. And it's interesting. It's called Dark Dungeons. And there was actually a movie made about it only in 2014, because it's like this crazy thing. So we can like read it out if you want. Like I can do a bit of my best voice acting.
We definitely have to act these out. So I this top one it's so comically evil, like how they're making it, how they're making it out.
But I kind of look at it and go, because apparently the chick with black hair is a teacher, so like she's like cool as fuck. So listen, so it's like, okay, wizard, cast your spell. So she's the dungeon master, right?
Okay, dungeon master. The spell of light blinds the monster.
Yes, right. And then the thief, Blackleaf, did not find the poison trap, and I declare her dead.
No,
not
Blackleaf. No, I'm going to die. Don't make me quit the game. Please don't. Someone save me. You can't do this.
And then her friend here that's sitting with that has just spelled the blinding light monster thing says, Marcy, get out of here. You're dead. You don't exist anymore. Right?
I think you have to say it more evil than that.
Yeah. Marcy, get out of here. You're dead. You don't exist anymore.
Marcy, get out of here. Yeah. You're dead. You don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Are these just like individual, like 2-panel things, or was this like a whole comic book?
No, this is the whole comic. So then, Debbie, your cleric has been raised to the 8th level. I think it's time you learn how to really cast spells. You mean you're going to teach me to have the real power? Yes, you have the personality for it now. The intense occult training through D&D prepared Debbie to accept the invitation to enter the Witch's Coven. I bought Elfstar to become a priestess and a witch. Welcome, Elfstar. Now you will become a priestess of the craft and the temple of Diana.
Oh my god, it's so funny. This is like, I mean, this was real. You know what the weirdest thing is, right? This is hilarious, but it was real. It was like a real concern.
This is what that he would sell these to churches, and churches would print them out. And you can see down the bottom where it says like repent the devil and join Jesus. So it says, Miss Frost, this game is fantastic. This makes the game real. It's not a fantasy anymore. I knew you already by the way you played the game, but it's just the beginning. There's so much more. Last night, I cast my first spell. This is real power. Which spell did you cast, Debbie? I used the mind bondage spell on my father. He was trying to stop me from playing Dungeons and Dragons. What was the result? He just bought $200 worth of D&D figurines and manuals. It was great. Later that week, hey, Debbie, Marcy's on the phone. She wants you to talk to her. She's really upset. I can't. I'm fighting the zombie. Tell her I'll see her tonight. Miss Anderson. Hi, Miss Anderson. Marcy wanted me to see her tonight. I'm glad you're here, Debbie. Marcy has shut the door in her room and won't come out. Hasn't been herself for weeks. Been very worried ever since her character in the game got killed. It's as if a part of her died. Maybe you can talk some sense into her." And then Marcy has killed herself.
What?
So
Well,
Marcy's hung
that
herself
took a
here.
turn.
"No, Marcy, you didn't have to do that. It's my fault Blackleaf died. I
Oh
can't
my
face life
God.
alone.
Oh
Miss
my
Frost, I
God.
can't get Marcy out of my mind. How could she do something like this? If I left the game, she'd be alive today. Get your priorities straight, Debbie. Your spiritual growth through the game is more important than some lousy loser's life."
So this is I'm glad that there was cringe in the past. That is
Pardon?
I'm glad that there was some cringe in the past.
And then of
That's
course
incredible.
she gets saved by the handsome Christian jock and says that
Nice.
he needs to like pray for her life and all of this kind of stuff, and that they have to gather all their Dungeons and Dragons stuff and burn it. And in my mind, I was
Oh,
dragons.
I don't know.
Imagine how many first edition Dungeons and Dragons figurines and books were burnt. How priceless they'd be now, you know. And so basically, it goes into this: Debbie burnt all her occult material that night, and blah blah blah. And the Lord set her
Oh my
free.
God. And then
So
they've got a little quiz at the end. Oh,
yeah,
it's
and that's
great.
you have to have your name for God and all that. And so
Oh
yeah,
wow. Wow.
so that is called Dark Dungeons. And so that
Hilarious.
was what the church distributed. And the reason that they distributed it was because of the fact that of specific like passages in the Bible that they would use. So theologians says like abstain from all appearances of evil.
Mm. Well, I
And
was going to ask,
Deuteronomy,
was there anything to it? I mean, like
well,
in the like
we'll
in
see, yeah,
not in like in like a well, was there like based on the beliefs
the
and based on
reasons.
like other supernatural stuff?
Yeah, and so there was. So the reasons for it was that they believed. In 1985, John Quigley of the Lakeville Gospel declared, "The game is an occult tool that opens up young people to influence and possession by demons."
Right.
And so this is the reason why, because when the church had an official stance on it like that, and there were religious leaders that had that stance, and the reason that they did was because they should abstain from all appearances of evil. And also, there's a passage in Deuteronomy that says, and this gets used all the time, it gets used by Ed and Lorraine Warren a lot, to not use Ouija boards, which is in a kind of similar vein, I guess, as this, is that there
You'll
shall
know
not
who
be
they
found
are if you've
among
watched The
you.
Conjuring.
Yeah, yeah. There should not be found among you anyone that makes his son or daughter pass through fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritualist, or one who calls up the dead. And so
Right.
this particular comic strip then had on it a man called William Schlobellen, who wrote a testimonial, which was attributed, like, which was used on this website too, that said during the 1970s, he himself was actually part of a Satanistic cult, that he was a high witch priest, and that the writers, the writers of Dungeons and Dragons actually came to the coven and they went over ritualistic spells and things like that, because they wanted to make sure that they were authentic. So
right.
then an ex-employee was interviewed in the 80s, and he said that he went to the managers and said, these are actual real like spells that can conjure real demons, and they should be taken out of the books. And the bosses said no, and so he quit because of the conscience. He had a heavy conscience.
Right.
But
Okay.
interestingly, through all of this backlash, so apparently in those first early editions, it basically was a grimoire. You could have used it to summon real demons. And so that was kind of the argument.
Well,
that
so
they
like
had actually based it on real satanic rituals.
right. Okay. Okay.
And
All right. Okay.
and
I
so
can see why that might ruffle feathers in that case.
yeah, and also it's also the reason why in 1989 all references to demons and devils and all that kind of stuff were taken out of the books. And to my knowledge, they don't actually say that anymore, because prior to
demons
that
are
there
still
was
there.
demons.
Demons
Yeah,
are
but
there.
and but they did take them out. There was parts of it that they changed because
Mm.
of this backlash, this religious backlash.
Mm.
So yeah, but
They may not use my demonology is not very strong. But
yeah,
I perhaps they don't use, perhaps they have like purely invented the demons that they have in the editions now. Um, I don't know about, there's not really I don't know about references to the devil. I mean, tieflings are
yeah,
essentially like devil-born people because they have
and
like, they are classically like rusty, big horns and tail,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
maybe it's just that our tolerance for this thing is just our tolerance for it has just gone way up, and they're just
yeah,
like, fuck it, who cares? We'll just put it in
and that's
anyway.
yeah, and that's it, and it's because their own belief of it is the whole deal is that if you see when you think about spiritual warfare, like which is a charismatic religious thing, is that the mind is the battleground for your soul. And so if you're spending hours and hours of your time like in imagination, using your imagination, and
Yeah,
especially if you're using it on things which are of the dark, you
right.
know, that's the reason why they would turn around and go, this is against God, this is not of the light, you know. And they reference this term called a magical worldview, so which is the clashing of two worlds. So they'll say that a magical worldview is completely not in an alignment with their religious one. So, and by the very virtue of Dungeons and Dragons, where you like throw your dice to determine your fate, they don't believe in that because they believe that everything is through blind faith.
Everything is it predetermined? Predeterminism.
Yeah, pretty much. Or you can pray to God, not that you can manipulate a technology like a spell or something like that, and then have the world things change, or like have blind luck.
But
But
couldn't you? I mean, let's poke holes in their argument a little bit. Couldn't you say
yeah,
that by rolling the dice was predetermined to land in a certain way, and therefore what happens is not actually random. It is predetermined.
yeah. Well, you could, but then they'd say, "Yeah, you shouldn't be using spells because or like they don't even agree with that because they believe that
Okay.
that's occultism or speaking to familiar spirits and all that kind of stuff. So that's the whole. They just reject an idea of a magical worldview is the term that they use,
So if
and
they
that
just taken, so if the magic was just out of it completely,
yeah.
would they have just been cool with it?
Well, no, because they'd still say that you should be abstaining from like appearances of evil. So you can't have any baddies
Oh my God.
because they just believe in the devil, like God, and then everything else is the devil. And so you can't really win an argument like this, because it's literally like, but we've seen it done through everything, like Harry Potter, same thing. They said that Harry Potter was witchcraft, encouraging witchcraft. You're always going to have people that have that. Yeah,
I mean,
and it
there's
is
witches in
witchcraft,
it. There's
there are
witches in it,
witchcraft, but they don't. But another interesting thing, which I thought was bizarre, and I didn't realize this, is that there is, like, I think it's in Milwaukee, there is, and in a whole, there's a blanket rule in Idaho for no prisons can play RPG games.
Oh, I don't like that.
Yeah, so you can't play in prison, you can't play RPG games. And there's a blanket rule, yeah, in Wisconsin, and because it promotes gang activity. And so they actually
What?
yeah, yeah. That's what they say. So you can't play Dungeons and Dragons, you can't make
Okay.
up fantasy roleplay games in prison. And like apparently that's a whole nother like subculture that it actually like brings people together. So they have separate tables, like they might have the the white supremacist table, and then
Yeah,
they've got
yeah.
the Mexican cartel, and then there's
That's
a Dungeons and
hilarious.
Dragons table that they all play at. And they have like, it's contraband to have dice and things like that for gambling. So they've come up with all
Oh,
these
okay.
really ingenious ways to create like dice to be able to play and create their own
It's just
ideas.
it's just funny. Like
It is.
Crips and Bloods, cartel members,
Yeah.
neo-Nazis, that's all fine, but fucking nerds, get out of here.
No,
No.
get
No
out. And then
nerds allowed in prison.
yeah, because all the nerds like bring everyone together. Because as I said, lots of people, because there's nothing else to do, they actually start playing Dungeons and Dragons in prison because it's like escapism. But funnily enough, the storylines that they follow are very rarely stuck in Dungeons and Monsters because they say we live in Dungeons and
We're already
Monsters.
there, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so they
yeah.
don't actually do that. So I thought that was kind of interesting from like researching through this. But yeah,
That's
like
fascinating.
if it wasn't for this entire part of history, the game may not have become what it did because basically the sales just skyrocketed exponentially after
Yeah, well, you
they
make it cool. This is the
well
when you like rail against something to this degree, and you
yeah
particularly with like moral panic,
yeah
when you throw this stuff at it, and you
mm-hmm,
get the people who already do it, who are like, no, it's not bad at all. This is what it is.
yeah
Then you drive more people to it. You drive more people to it by going, okay, so what is this?
yeah and
Oh,
I
it's
think
not
too
the
that
thing that they said on TV. Okay, well then, well, I'll give it a try. And then people like it.
exactly
People,
yeah and interestingly enough there was lots of studies done with Dungeons and Dragons and I think it's like there was I'm not quite sure exactly what the term is for the particular um like the organizations, but it's like suicidology or something. And
hmm,
there was no connection between it. They couldn't find any connection between kids dying in the game and then killing themselves,
hmm,
which was like the major kind of claim.
hmm,
But you know, I can see from the perspective of it potentially being a modern grimoire
hmm,
how
yeah.
there may be some validity in that. And you don't even need to have like a religious thinking mind to believe that because like I can see how if someone is creating like have you ever
Hmm.
heard of tulpas and thought forms?
Yeah, so I was about to say, because I just had to like
Yeah.
double check, because we emailed a little bit before this, and I was checking,
Yeah.
because you mentioned, I remember you mentioned the grimoires, and it was like, and then you mentioned the power of belief, and
Yeah.
then Zozo demons and Ouija boards and thought forms and things like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, if you are sitting there spending hours, months, even of years, even on a certain game where you've got characters that you've created and
Mm,
you have entire backstories for them and you can create like a rich story for them,
mm,
like they can become real. There are people, there are communities. Like you don't have to go too far. You can look up the Reddit tulpas on the subreddit tulpas and find people that literally have that believe that they have sentient. They've created thought forms that have
mm,
their own sentience, that have a mind outside of their own. And so
mm,
if you and you know that goes back thousands of years to the idea that you can create a thought form. And
mm.
especially if you have
Yeah.
like a grimoire, which is if it is using like a grimoire can is just a way to summon something. So, you know, if you have enough people that believe, like what if the power of the belief, what if there is something to that, you know?
Mm. Well, the idea of like thoughts manifesting is something
Mm,
that I don't know if it's cropped up again recently or it's always been there and I've only just started
mm,
noticing it. But the idea that mental projection and like thinking if enough people think something, then it
yeah,
becomes reality or something
yeah.
like that.
And that's what I mean. So it's like, who's not to say that that could happen? You know, like
Mm,
who's not to say that if you and you know, I don't want to you know, hopefully that by even introducing that kind of concept to people
mm,
that those things happen to them, like especially if you're a community of people that are literally investing a lot of time in thinking about a certain thing and then we've introduced this concept that perhaps what you're thinking could come true. But that is the power of belief, that
mm.
is that whole manifestation. Like, you know,
Yeah.
people manifest, like, you know, think of 1111, manifest what you want, manifest your dreams,
Mm.
you know?
Well, it's the power of it's the power of belief and the power of perception because
Yeah.
perception is often
Mm.
reality for a lot of
And I
people.
think and that's the thing too, is that like I feel like there probably would be people out there that can become very involved in a fantasy world,
Mm.
and so there could be people like, but that's the thing, mental illness. It's just that if someone is mentally unwell, then they, yeah, they very well may have been appearing to summon some kind of demon or do something like that. Like
Mm.
from the outside, it may have looked like that to somebody, but the
Mm.
reality is that they were mentally unwell, and that if but maybe that idea had been put into them through playing a game, but they could have been playing a completely different game or a video game. It doesn't necessarily
Mm.
mean that that is the total
Mm.
cause of it. You know what I mean?
Well, like taking the kid as an example, and
Mm.
may rest in peace. But the kid who goes, like the kid who is very very smart, who goes to
Yeah.
university and is, I mean, if this is America, he could be. I mean, in the UK, we tend to go to uni at 18, so
Yeah.
he's
That's what I
either
mean, like 5 years younger.
he's going to be, yeah. I mean, he's going to be at least 4 years younger than everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else can go out and do things that he can't do. So he's going
Yeah.
to be very isolated. He's going to be very lonely. He's going to be a fish out of water.
Yeah.
He's going to have this way of making friends, but he's also excluded from that group of friends. And
Yeah.
it's someone who's probably always been on the outside,
Yeah.
because people who are very, very intelligent in that way are often outsiders, because
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult to relate to, because you don't really have many peers. You tend
No.
to relate to people who are like you, and if you
Yeah.
don't have that, then you end up being very lonely. And when people are lonely,
Mm.
they escape into things, and
Yeah.
things
And
go wrong.
and playing devil's advocate, like, he was quite young.
Hmm.
And the thing is that, like you said, in those books, they did introduce those concepts that perhaps if he did have some kind of sheltered existence, he had never experienced before.
Hmm.
And, and that's the other thing too about role playing, is that it like is used now in therapy, all kinds of stuff, because it provides a safe way of exploring
Hmm.
like something different, you
Yeah.
know? And so you can psychologically and emotionally kind of go through those motions, and maybe that's what it was. He was just emotionally not mature enough to deal with the content that the people that he was playing with, who probably were
Hmm.
5 or 6 years older than him, like were, and it
I mean,
did have a negative like impact on him.
it could be. I mean, like the thing about like D&D as well is that you're very, very much you're very kind of reliant on the vibe of the group being good. Like if the
Yeah.
vibe of the group is not good, like
Yeah.
if your dungeon master or your game master is kind of a jerk,
Yeah. You're not
then
gonna have a
that's
good
going to
time.
affect everybody. If one of the players or two of the players are kind of
Mm.
jerks, or if they're in a social setting that you're not necessarily a part
Mm.
of, it can be kind of taxing on. It can be taxing on your mind. It can be taxing on your escapism, and
And I
taxing on
guess
your
that's the
mental
thing
health.
too, is that is actually like an even worse form of bullying, because you're almost in a state of vulnerability with people that you trust. And then if they embarrass you, or if they, single you out,
Mm.
then, it's a lot worse, because you're actually like trying to have fun with your friends. And then all of a sudden the people that you think are your friends aren't, or they've done something
Hmm.
and you're a bit like, well, or they've killed your character off, and they're like, well, we're not going to stop this campaign just because you're dead. You know,
Mm.
you're not
Well, it's
you're
like
not
it.
invited anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. You got to roll a new character. You've got to kind
Mm.
of make it clear, I guess, to people. This is a thing. You've got to make it clear to people who play these games that your character dying is something that can definitely happen, and
Mm.
and often will. And I mean, it can be a really. I mean, this hasn't gone up yet. I was talking with Hannah last time, Hannah
Mm-hmm.
Jeffers Huser, who is also a big D&D player. We were talking about like character deaths and how
Mm.
like either a character that you created died and it was like, oh, it was a kind of a gut punch,
Mm.
or the character or a character in the party who your character had a close kind of bond with dies,
Mm.
or you're kind of involved in it somehow. Like it can really be like, I mean, if you're really invested in the story, if the story is told well enough, that can be
Mm-hmm.
just, it's like, it's really a kick. It can be a real kick in the gut. It's fantastic
Yeah.
storytelling, but
Well, and that's the thing. That's it. It's like the storytelling aspect of it. But like you said, you get invested in your characters, like when you read a
mm,
book, and
yeah,
then something terrible happens to them, and except
mm,
for it is more kind of real.
yeah,
And I think that that's the whole thing where it's like, yeah, the that being so invested is also a threat to
mm,
people that want you to be, only using your imaginative power for good, for their perceived level of good, you
mm.
know,
Well,
because of
this is the thing with stories. It's how it's essentially how we communicate.
mm.
We
Well,
don't we
see,
communicate with like words and with gesture and things. We
mm,
communicate with story. We communicate ideas across time with story.
mm,
This is how religions form and how religions are. I mean, the spiritual aspect of it, I don't know.
yeah,
There's a million. There's, I mean, as a species, we understand barely a fraction of a percent of the universe around us.
mm,
But the way we've communicated certain ideas across time is with story.
yeah,
And if the side thing of that is if a better story comes along, then people will gravitate toward that.
mm,
And you have to, if you're the person who's told the old story, you often have to, if you're, I mean, if you've developed like a system of control or a monetary system of it,
mm,
you have to kill that other story in any way you can in order
mm.
to
Yeah.
keep your. I mean, this is if you're like a megalomaniac, or
And
if you're
well, even
very,
think about the fact that we've had like obviously oral traditions of like speaking stories, but then even then, up until very only recent history, that
mm,
reading and writing books and dancing and music and all that kind of stuff hasn't been allowed under
mm-hmm,
periods of like religious control
right, yeah.
because they don't want you to be reading it. There are still some religions now that the only thing they can read is the Bible. They're not allowed to read books.
I mean, we don't even have to look at religion. I mean, we can just look at sociological stuff.
Yeah,
Like, I mean,
exactly.
when the D&D stuff is obviously a part of it, but like even recently,
Mm.
gaming
Oh
has been
yeah.
railed against, and
Well, it's
only
like
now
what
it's
happened with
being
Call
kind
of
of like,
Duty when they
yeah,
said that Call of Duty was like making kids want to shoot other kids,
right,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, and Doom. I mean, there was a massive moral panic around Doom, partly because of the
Yeah.
demonic stuff, and
Yeah.
because I think Columbine was like only a couple of years after, and
Yeah.
it got very.
Yeah.
And I
So
mean the Columbine stuff as well. The way that media latched onto that and blew that
mm,
up
exactly.
really caused, it was like a flashpoint
Hmm.
where that exponentially increased the number of school shootings
Yeah.
and mass shootings in
And
general.
yeah, and then we just see this constantly like cookie cutted, like it just because it follows that
Mm,
basically the same principles of how it goes. Like you like the media comes onto it, then there is people that want to like target the behavior, and then they're calling for something to be done about it, and the people
mm,
that can do something about it are the politicians, and then the media has to pick a side. So there's
mm,
literally like a line in the sand where you go,
yeah.
are you with us or are you against us? And then that causes this like a
Mm.
flurry.
Well, it's also like it's also people wanting easy solutions to complicated problems.
Mm,
Like all of this, like from the D&D stuff through the gaming, through even what we have now with like cancel culture and things like that.
yeah,
It's people looking for, okay, well, if we just remove this thing, then everything's okay.
yeah,
And it's like
and
no, because there's like a million other variables
yeah,
to it, and this one is like 2% of it.
and it's still the same problem. Just sad young people killing themselves and killing other people.
Mm,
And it doesn't
right.
matter if it's in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and 60s, in like that it's that same problem,
Mm,
and it just changes. The face of it changes,
mm-hmm.
what someone thinks is causing it. but there's always going to be something. Like there's always going to be the next thing. Like what, you know, the generation of our children's are doing, they're going to have something crazy too that we're going to think is crazy. That even in our mindset, based on our own childhoods or what we went through, we don't think is, you know, correct.
Right.
Like you know, people, when newspapers first come out, people thought that people were spending too much time reading newspapers. Then we spend too much time on our phone. Then we spend too much time playing video games, you know? So
too much time in front of the TV.
Yeah, exactly. Like when cinemas came out, people were worried about what it was going to do to young people sitting in the dark for hours watching watching cinema. But now we have mobile phones that we're constantly on, you know? So it's like, this is, you know, it's kind of one of those things. But I think that the takeaway from it is that, you know, that it's something which really solidified the popularity of the game. And I think too, like Dungeons and Dragons was the beginning for not just like, and obviously before Dungeons and Dragons, there were like, do you remember those books that you used to read that would like choose your own adventure books? So they were the precursor to Dungeons and Dragons. So that's kind of what started that whole idea, you know.
I had one of those for the Lost World Jurassic Park when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I always got eaten by velociraptors. It was frustrating.
But they were like popular in the 60s and 70s, yeah, you know. And then that's what kind of brought on like Dungeons and Dragons. And then Dungeons and Dragons was the beginning of all basically any kind of even video games that we play now. You know, that same model, so popular, you know. So
I find it particular. Yeah. I find it just gives you such a different, it's just such a different, I find it's such a richer experience actually than playing a video game.
Well, because it's personal, it's in your mind.
And there's no limit.
Know? There's no limit.
There's no engine that is limiting stuff.
Yeah. And also you don't need a lot. Like you can literally play just with some dice and a story that you can make up, you know? And you can work on your stories and you can do all that. And it does have those, like, you know, they have this list here of the brainwashing techniques that Dungeons and Dragons use. So it's like, so it says fear generation, right? But for everything else, there is an opposite. So they say fear generation via spells and mental imaging about fear-filled emotional scenes, threats to survival for the fantasy roleplay characters. But then you could turn around and say, well, but also it is teaching hope. That, like, you know, that, and that's resilience training, is that, you know, if you like, and you can apply that in the real world by going, you know, you can learn resilience through role-playing games because you can have hope. And then even if it doesn't work out, like you said, just roll a new character, like you can pick yourself up and you just start again. But then they say number 2 is isolation and psychological removal from traditional support structures into an imaginary world. So they say that the physical isolation due to the extreme time-consuming playing activities outside the family atmosphere. So they're saying going and spending time with your friends instead of with your family is isolating you from traditional kind of like things which are important. The third is physical.
Don't you know friends are the work of Satan, Patrice?
Yeah, exactly. Images in the mind can almost be as real as actual experiences. Focus on the game is upon killings and torture for power, acquisitions of wealth, and survival of characters. So they're saying that people are dying almost like moral deaths when they're imagining these things happening to these characters that are in their minds. Erosions of family values. The dungeon master demands an all-encompassing and total loyalty, control, and allegiance. Would you agree? Have you had that experience?
I have had that experience, not from me as a DM. Like, I feel like this is, so, I mean, this is obviously, the people who had these ideas, they have a certain idea of what D&D is, that it sometimes is, but really when it's done properly, it's not. Yeah. Like, it's very collaborative. Like, if you're the DM, the idea is you're building the story with your party. Yeah. And it's not all about combat. It's really not. No. It's very combat focused, which is slightly annoying, but you can like, yeah.
and that's what it does. It basically like continues on and explains how it's all about like you basically lose self-control to the dungeon master, that you like, you know, give yourself up to the dungeon master. Like, so yeah, it is very like the way that they see it. They have a certain specific, you know, idea of how it should be, and that's what they stick to because it fits with
they're
their
assuming
moral.
it's being played badly, I think, is
Yeah.
what's yeah.
Yeah, and that it is trying to like bring people over to the dark side. But they, like
Yeah,
I said,
yeah.
they mentioned using a Star Wars reference. They said the same thing about Star Wars. They said that Star Wars is against religion because the concept of the Force, which can be used for good or evil, is once again a magical world, a magical worldview thinking technique that you can use something for good or for evil when it doesn't work like that. That you can manipulate something with a third party kind of thing. They don't believe that you're able to do that. So.
Well, it seems like any magic is verboten, basically. Like in
Yeah, well, that's it.
well, it's like it's not just kind of isolated to sort of the more kind of I guess fundamentalist Christians. In China, you like certain movies will not be played because they are very against um like sort of spiritual, well, they're very against like ghosts, the idea
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like the evil ghost, and they're very against magic and witchcraft of a certain
Well,
type.
well, I couldn't imagine that Dungeons and Dragons would be allowed in China because it also encourages free thinking.
You know what, it may not be, it may not be
I
allowed.
feel like it wouldn't be something. It's exactly the same as why it's not allowed in prisons because it
Yeah.
makes people, you know, like the
Mm,
argument for prisons, like, and that's one thing too is that they almost make this argument that they don't allow it because, you know, sometimes there's maps involved and all that kind of stuff, and they think that they're trying to make a
mm.
map of the prison, and then it's like planning a prison break, and it's almost like a thought experiment. Yeah, you know, like all kinds of stuff, like trying to, you know, run that. But I think yeah, it's
That would be really
very
cool, actually.
fascinating. Yeah, it's
Mm,
very fascinating. It's super fascinating. And yeah, I find it really interesting because obviously, like, from a different kind of world, like, but still one which is very deep in lore, you know, the UFO world and
mm,
understanding all of that. Like, you know, but it's like anything, it's like Tolkien,
mm,
like they because of how in depth that world is too, that was completely roasted by same
mm,
as C.S. Lewis, everything like that. The religious fanatics have
mm,
roasted all of those things because of the how just involved they become. But
mm,
yeah, hopefully that was a bit entertaining to take you on that journey and
mm.
teach you, learn a little bit about that, like I learned this week.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fascinating topic, like where that kind of thing comes from. Yeah,
And I mean,
it is
and that's the
fascinating.
thing too, is that like we spoke about briefly, just the Zozo demons on a Ouija board, and
Mm,
like even just the whole Ouija board experience itself. Like, who knows? Maybe board games are conduits for evil.
mm. I
You
don't know
know?
how much I subscribe to the Ouija board.
Yeah,
It
but
seems
this is
like
it.
that's
Like,
easily games, but
yeah,
you never know. You know?
it could be, but that's
I've
it.
never
But you
used
don't
one,
know.
so I
Like,
don't know.
if something comes through, you
Mm.
know, like who knows? It would be interesting to see if anyone has had any like actual paranormal experiences playing Dungeons and Dragons.
That would be interesting. That would be very
Like,
interesting.
even if there were things like they were playing and like some like, you know, just any kind of story that happened that was a bit weird,
Hmm.
or at the time they thought, oh, that was a bit scary, you know,
Hmm. Well,
because
I want to do a bit of a quick fire thing here in a way, because
mm-hmm,
there's so because well, I say quick fire, we'll see what happens. You never know. I we did a I was meant to do in the campaign that we have on here. We were meant to
mm-hmm,
do a an episode that was going to be a montage. That was
yeah,
meant to be like a 30-minute montage or something like that, and it ended up
mm-hmm,
being I think 4 hour long sessions that were not montaged at all. We were just doing the thing. It's like, oh, okay, well,
mm-hmm,
all right, whatever happens. So you never
mm-hmm.
know what will happen. But so you have some, so not with not well, I don't know. Have you played D&D? You've played other stuff,
No,
I know.
I played Hero Quest Talisman, so they were Games
Hmm.
Workshop games,
Right.
um and I've got that I've got the Sherlock Holmes game here actually, which my brother just bought for me. That's one that you can play by yourself.
The
Interestingly enough.
Sherlock Holmes game.
Yeah, so you're solving mysteries on the Thames as Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, is that
yeah
221B?
I've got it just here. Hang on a second. Let me just grab it.
Okay. Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. The Thames Murders and Other Cases.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a game that I used to play with my my grandparents and my cousins called 22, and actually with my parents as well, because we got it later on, called 221B, where you are little Sherlock Holmes busts, and you go around and you pick up clues from various like places. It's a bit like expanded Cluedo kind of.
Yeah.
And you get a clue to solving the mystery in each place. And then when you get it, when you feel like you have a theory, you go back to 221B and you give your theory, and if you're right, then you win.
See, that this one doesn't work like that. I think this is like you're equipped with a copy of the Times, the map of London, the directory, and more importantly, your logic as you roam the streets of London trying to solve the most heinous crimes. So yeah, 1 to 8 players. There's 9 different stories that you can play through. But yeah, so we mainly played Hero Quest, which was like the Games Workshop and what's MB? Was it Marvel? What MB?
I don't know. Games Workshop and the other one.
Yeah, and basically that was like design Milton Bradley. And so that was designed to introduce, like, it was for like a younger. Have you ever played Hero Quest?
No, but I think I have seen. I think on YouTube I saw someone playing Hero Quest, and it made me want to buy Hero Quest.
Yeah, well, they brought out a new version in 2021. But we have the original 1989 version that we played like all through the 90s, and it was like literally an entry level. It was designed to introduce fantasy role play board games to like kids pretty much, but also like it's really good. Like it even has like furniture for the rooms and everything, like really super cool. And like you could go through and like paint all the little things if you wanted, and buy expansion packs and everything like that. So that was really cool. And that was a pretty, like, because you'd be able to choose different games and different quests to play on the one board. But then also we had the Talisman, which was really cool as well. Have you heard of Talisman?
I haven't heard of Talisman.
Talisman was another kind of 80s cult classic game, which there's 3 levels. So and you have to go to and you basically like collect all these different followers. Like you have follower cards and magic and different things that you collect, and you can do as many laps as you want to, like, you have to kind of collect all your stuff, and then you move up to the next one and it gets harder, and then you have to sacrifice followers to demons and vampires and stuff. It's also a really cool game. That one takes a little bit more. Like these were games that we would set up and play over weeks and things like that as well when we were growing up. But yeah, so I've not played Dungeons and Dragons. My brother bought me it for Christmas a couple of years ago because he was just like, how have you not played Dungeons and Dragons? He's like, also with your crazy like knowledge of, like, he goes, you could do some wild like sci-fi UFO ones, like, you know, you could be a crazy dungeon master. That's what my brother said. He was like, why don't you just quit your job and become like a professional dungeon master? He's like, you could cosplay and everything, dress up.
I mean, it's always an option, although I'm not entirely sure how it works.
Yeah, there's always that. We've always got that to fall back on.
Fall back on gaming for a living. Yeah.
Was that the quick fire question?
Well, there were more. Okay. So
all right, I'll have to keep them concise. There should be like a 2-minute timer for the answer.
The main thing of this is tangenting all the time, so it's all good. Okay, so are you familiar with D&D at all in terms of like
Um,
races slash classes slash things you can do?
oh, I know, like only very superficially, like the whole kind of like chaotic good, you know,
Mm. Oh, the
like that's
alignment, yeah.
yeah, like I don't really know. I'm not very familiar at all with it because it wasn't
Mm.
something that we grew up playing. I think that we weren't like we weren't sheltered by any means, but I still feel like in Australia is a lot more conservative than what um people think that we are. I think
Hmm.
so. Growing up in Australia, I think that that's still kind of maybe a bit of that satanic panic kind of spilled over because I didn't even know anybody that played it growing up. The only thing that
Mm.
we had any kind of exposure to Dungeons and Dragons growing up would have been the cartoon that
Mm.
got
Okay.
that got cancelled because of the satanic panic thing eventually.
Right. So my
Mm.
question would be, what would you play as if you were entering into a game?
Oh, I probably would be. I still feel like I'd be like a healer.
Okay. Cleric.
I reckon. Yeah, I think it'd be a cleric, some
Hmm.
kind of like witchy thing. I reckon.
Okay. Yeah. I think yeah.
Maybe a thief.
Oh,
Maybe
oh,
a thief
okay.
or like
Like
a
a
yeah,
like a
maybe.
rogue.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, nice. Okay. And would you be an elf, a human, a dwarf, a halfling,
um yeah, the halfling.
one of the many
They were
animal races
hobbits,
there
weren't
are
they? But
now?
they had to get changed because they couldn't be called hobbits because Tolkien's estate took them to court.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just
Yeah.
halflings now.
Yeah, maybe an elf. I did just finish watching all the Hobbit and everything again, so I'll lock
Hmm.
in elf. I'll be an elf.
Hmm. Elf is a strong choice.
Yeah.
All right. Very nice. Okay. Excellent. And sort of on the more on the topic of what you kind of look at on your channels on the
Hmm.
podcasts,
Yeah.
because you approach from a skeptical perspective, which is, I think we mentioned before, it's like a probably a good way to approach it,
Yeah.
um, to avoid going down rabbit holes, even though it can still happen. But of all the things you've looked at and researched,
Hmm.
across your podcasting career,
Hmm.
either alien focused or supernatural focused, what has been the most compelling one that you've looked at?
Or the most compelling one,
Mm,
there's a couple that I'm convinced happened, like
okay.
convinced. And the Flatwoods Monster, believe it or not, is one that I believe happened. But I don't think that it was the way that it sounds kind of comical because when you think of the Flatwoods Monster, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I do, but for
It's
people
normally
who don't.
depicted as like this big kind of red-faced alien that is almost wearing like a green metallic skirt with, you know, this big funny head. Like it's almost like very cartoonishly depicted because of this
Mhm,
one image that a woman drew, and then it was put on like a like a internationally syndicated television show like the very next
mhm,
day because basically like the kids saw this thing crash on this mountain and like they went and said mum go like basically the kids saw this fireball in the sky and the kids are like mom like there's something's crashed at old man Johnson's house next door, like we got to go check it out. And they go over there and there's this like misty, everything's on fire, and then this thing comes out of the mist and like chases them, like smell sulfur, all this kind of stuff.
mhm,
And but I believe that happened because when I read the original reports of it,
mm,
it wasn't depicted like the image. It was sounded like it was more like a reptilian looking creature. And then yeah,
mm.
like the depictions of it were different. And then there were other like independently corroborated like stories from people saying that they saw this same fireball over 4 different states. And then
Ooh.
yeah, on the same day. And then there was another sighting of a creature very similar to it. Then like 2 days, a day or two later, And then a week or a week or a half later, kind of further up the state, there was this really strange story about a police officer finding a charred body, which smelled like sulfur. Like, it was just really strange. But then I started thinking, like, reptilian skin, scales, looks like a burned body. So if that was, I felt like it was almost like a disinformation campaign.
Okay.
Because it was just this really strange story that was just like put in there, and it was like, but it was put in there along with information about this alien. So I was like, why the hell? Like, that's such a strange topic to put in. Like, oh, it was a burnt body. Like, it was really weird. So that was a compelling one. I believe that the Mothman stuff, something happened there.
Okay.
Too many people saw enough. But then probably the most compelling and one that creeped me out the most researching it was on John Key, when he was trying to he was using a scrying mirror, a black mirror, to basically translate an angelic language. He believed that he was talking to angels.
Okay.
But and then it got started to get dark, and they were asking him to do all this dark stuff. And then basically what ended up happening was him and this other guy who were using the scrying mirror to translate what the angels were talking about basically ended up sleeping with each other's wives. And then, like, everything went to hell, because that's basically like committing adultery. And then he lost everything. Like, his house got ransacked. They both lost money. They were apparently, like, even doing alchemy and things like that, like literally turning minerals into gold. There was a whole heap of, like, strange kind of stories. But the part which freaked me out is that I found in a museum is the actual mirror, the black mirror that he used to scry. And it turns out that the mirror that he used came from it was an Aztec mirror, which was used to contact an Aztec god who was the god of the sacrifice, things like that. So it was almost, I was thinking in my mind, were they talking with an Aztec god of sacrifice? The one that, yeah, it was really creepy, really crazy story. And that I think that mirror, John Key's mirror, is actually in the National Gallery in London.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The thing is, though, too, when I looked into more about that, because that particular language that they had depicted was actually written down, and I found that there are a lot of people who, like, because it's actually considered a grimoire, because after it was found to not be the language of the angels, so then they were like, it's more like it's summoning demons, it's demon language, demon writing. And there are particular people even that follow that kind of, like, demon mancy, like, you know, summoning demons and doing that kind of work. They don't do it. They don't even like talking about it, because they know people that have done it, and it's just completely wrecked their entire lives. Like, it's like bad even by demon standards. Like, they just don't yeah, they just don't fuck with it at all. Yeah, so it was kind of a compelling one.
Gosh, yeah. That's, it's bad when people who are like
Yeah,
who are
they're like,
working,
yeah, we're
they were
all
looking
about
at
summoning
demons.
demons. Yeah,
Yeah.
but don't use this particular one, because it is very, very, very bad.
Yeah. I mean,
So, I don't know, I found
we're
that
all for
really
demons, but this shit, no.
No,
Avoid
like,
this completely.
none of that. None of that. Yeah.
All
So that's it.
right.
That's probably one of the most compelling kind of stories. But there's also like Rendlesham Forest as well, is, I feel like, up there is one of the heavy hitters of that something definitely happened.
Now that's the one in Britain, isn't it? Rendlesham.
Yeah. So that happened in Britain.
Yeah. It's a UFO sighting.
And that particular part of London, that particular part of England, has lots and lots of, like, traditional, like, very historic stories, things happening around there. And that there was sightings that happened like 6 months before that as well. And I think the thing about it which was compelling is that the sergeant, I think it was the general that was in charge there, he
Mhm.
actually used a voice recorder to record it, and none of them have ever
Ooh,
recanted. Yeah, so you can actually find those tapes. They're all
fascinating.
part, yeah, where he talks about the things that he see, and he said that he'd see this thing and it was like blinking like an eye, which isn't like they tried to say that it was just the lighthouse in the distance, but you can't
Mm,
tell me that these people have been based on this base. Like,
yeah.
couldn't tell the difference between
It's like,
a
oh, it turns out I
lighthouse.
was looking at the lighthouse the whole time.
Yeah,
That lighthouse
and
that's
that
been there the whole time.
yeah, and that's the thing too, because this was all like in Cold War era.
Yeah.
So apparently, like the ship came back, the spaceship came back the next day, buzzed a whole heap of bunkers that had nuclear weapons in it. But that obviously hasn't been like has never been like
Mm.
confirmed, because that was all still that's all still considered top secret because it was
Mm.
storage of nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Alien stuff fascinates me as well.
Yeah,
That's
it's
when I find most alien ones compelling in a way.
yeah. Well, it's even the whole reptilian agenda, like
Mm.
that last podcast. The next ones I'm doing is on Venusians, which is going to look at like Valiant Thor and like the kind of contactees and George Adamski and all of
Hmm.
that. So yeah, it's I think if you're interested in the alien lore, like this particular second season, but you don't really know, like it's going to be a great place for people to start if they want to kind of have a good solid introduction to the basics, and
Mm.
then we can build on there to try and like get as we get further into the series.
I tell you what, Patrice, you and your perfect segues. That's the perfect segue to bring us to the close. All right,
That's it,
so
that's what we want.
yeah, so check that out. Yeah, subscribe
Yeah,
to the A's for Alien podcast and Keeping
yeah,
It Supernatural, and
yeah.
check those out. So I was going to say, where can people find you? But I just told people where they can find you.
Yeah, and
Where
I'm
else
active
can
on my
they find you?
Instagram. So yeah, um I'm active on my Instagram as well. So you can find me on there. Like, we've got a great community of people as well. Um that yeah, so there's the Keeping It Supernatural.
Hmm.
That's only brand new. That's why it's got 7 subscribers. It's
Yeah,
cute.
brand new.
Brand new. Yes. And then the A is for Alien, which is new too. It's kind of funny
Mhm.
because I don't like video my podcast, but everyone's like, you should do it. That would make it take off. And I'm like, well, no. I like being hidden behind my microphone. But yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on. I've had the best time. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's been really cool to actually meet you and speak to you in person rather than just
I
listening to
know.
you. Yeah.
But isn't it funny though? Don't you think, like, the medium of podcasting, like, you probably feel like you know me really well because you've listened to me for so long. Like, don't you think, I always find that people feel like they know me already because of, like,
Yeah.
podcasting is such a personal thing, you know?
Well, it's one that you
So
have to remember, like I always have to remember when I interview somebody who I've listened to before, I'm like, okay, I've got to remember to actually ask things that I already know that you
but they don't know that I
yeah, because
know.
they don't know that I
Yeah,
know that. Yeah.
yeah. That's funny,
Yeah.
isn't it? All right.
All
I've
right.
had a
Well,
great time. Thank you so much.
yeah. Well, thank you for coming on.
Yep,
And
it'll be good if see some of you guys over on my channels.
yes, definitely. Yes. And thank you for watching. Yeah, like, comment, and subscribe. You can find me where you can always find me, here on this channel or at Matt Waterhouse Author on Minds. And also on Instagram, but I rarely. I have like a Facebook and an Instagram, but I never say that you can find me on them. I should probably start doing that. Never mind. All right. So take care,
Alrighty.
everyone, and we'll see you next time.